Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of season 3 of Dr. G's Think Tank on Resilience. I am so grateful that you're here, and I'm so excited to introduce you to these incredible guests. Today, we're going to talk about something that is heavy on the minds of most adults in the United States, and that is elections. Big decisions are going to be made. Big impact is going to be felt in the next few months. And the upside to this time period is I feel like every 4 years in the US, this is a time where more people are civically involved, willing to consider, what do I want to have happen? What kind of future am I aiming for? And that's a really key part of resilience, figuring out not necessarily if it will happen, but what is it that I hope will happen, and what could my part be to make that happen? So we're going to talk about how to stay resilient, because boy, it can be hard, and engaged. And the first person I want to introduce you to is KP Simmons. KP is a powerhouse human, a college professor, entrepreneur, and passionate community activist. She's the founder and CEO of the project management and event production consulting firm KPC & Co. Her list of esteemed clients and projects include, but aren't limited to, the Barack Obama Foundation, Dominion Energy, Carlos Dunlap Foundation, SC Counts, and the Honorable First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden. She's served as a national advisor on the Biden-Harris campaign for presidency, transitioning into an advanced associate traveling with First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, which is where we met, and I had the chance to see her brilliance firsthand. KP, hi.
Hello.
I'm so glad you're here, and I want to start off by asking you, how have you noticed other people reacting to and talking about or engaging with just the fact that we have an upcoming election?
So I think it's been mixed emotions, right? So some people oftentimes just naturally get anxious during this time of year because it's a decision-making time of year. And it can be, side A against side B, and not a lot of people even like choosing sides. So I've seen a lot of mixed emotions. I've seen anxious, I've seen excited, I've seen people get engaged. And then with the new layer of presidential runners that are coming up, I've seen people gotten excited. I've also seen people gotten scared, you know? So again, I feel like I've seen a mix of emotions, and obviously being behind the scenes, it's been very interesting to even see how staff and supporters are taking things or grabbing the ball and running to make sure that we see what the end is going to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that this might hit differently for people that this has major professional implications for and changes their life. And that brings me to introducing Bhavani Patel, who was recently a candidate for Congress in Pennsylvania's 12th congressional district and currently serves as an elected official on Edgewood Council. She was previously community outreach manager in the office of Allegheny County Executive Fitzgerald and co-founded Beam Data, which created Be the Change, a platform to empower citizens to share ideas and legislative feedback directly with state legislators. I have some things I'd like to say directly to my state legislators. That's a good idea. She's made a huge impact on a community I care very much about, and I'm thrilled she's here today. Bhavani, hello.
Hello.
I'd like to ask you, in your variety of hats, politically speaking, how have you noticed other people reacting to talking about engaging with the upcoming election?
Yeah, so I think that there are a lot of varied emotions, as KP was alluding to. I think, in the circles that I run in, having just come off of a really contentious Democratic primary here in the critical swing state of Pennsylvania, I think, unfortunately, it seems like there's a lot of anxiety, fear, and particularly just because of the nature of this election, I think that there's also just a lot of negativity in terms of the rhetoric that's going back and forth. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that we're facing, and this is something that's been a pattern, I think, when we think about politics, when we think about election cycles, is just misinformation and how information is spread. And so, I think that with that comes a lot of high intensity emotions, and how we're making sure that we're differentiating between fact from fiction, and making sure that our communities that we care about, the communities that we're touching, have adequate information to parse the headlines that they're reading and then come to, nuanced conclusions so that they can ultimately make a decision of who they want to support. When I was running, it was the Democratic primary, so I am a Democrat. And just looking at the sort of, even just like the last debate between, Vice President Kamala Harris and, former President Trump, I think you could just tell that there's also just almost like a sadness, I think, in terms of just where we are as a country. That, the type of rhetoric that we saw on a national debate stage, which was probably watched globally, that this is the reflection in some ways that we're sending to everybody of who we are as a nation. So I think, I think that we need to continue to strive for better. And I think that, November is going to be really, really, really important to see where we head as a nation.
I appreciate you talking about there's an identity piece for us as Americans. And that's probably true in every country's elections, that there's a, what does this say about us and who do we mean, not just me picturing what's the future I want, but who do we mean to be in the world? And I appreciate you mentioning the spread of information and headlines, because that brings me to our third guest. Christine Sorensen has been an award-winning professional journalist for 28 years, 23 of them here in Pittsburgh. She currently anchors KDKA TV News at 4 and 5 p.m. and produces and writes and reports stories in partnership with also kidsburg.org. Christine also hosted Pittsburgh Today Live for 11 years on KDKA, and that's where I was lucky enough to meet her. We've worked together, really. She's been kind enough to call me now and again for a consultation since 2015. Christine, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm honored to be here. Thanks, Debbie.
And so I wondered, from your perspective as a journalist, how have you noticed other people reacting to talking about engaging with the election?
Well, I think a lot of people I talk to recognize that we're living in history-making moments right now. And in my job as a news person, I mean, that's kind of what we're doing, is recording the history day by day, moment by moment. But I think people are able to step back and say, wow, what's happening right now is our kids are going to be reading about this. And then we keep hearing, especially where we live in Pennsylvania, that we're going to decide the election. That's a lot of pressure. I mean, you better know what's going on. And so people want to know what's going on, but that's a lot too, because, hearing people are confused. They hear one thing, they hear another thing. They're not sure what's a fact. They're not sure what's true. And to reiterate what KP said, I think a lot of people are frustrated. Some are scared, some are excited. There's so many emotions. I also think people are exhausted because it's a long haul, this election process, and we're in the home stretch. But when I talk to a lot of people, a lot of them are dug in. I mean, they honestly are, some of them are not interested in getting new information too. And so, it's a lot of emotions, I think, in this one election cycle.
I think that's true. And I really appreciate the but that you mentioned, because what I heard you say was people do care what happens, but they're exhausted or they're really feeling the pressure. And I wonder if people who are with us today in our recording, and actually some just popped in now, Bruce just said, it seems to me that free speech should not include or allow misinformation, especially the political election sphere. I believe in free speech, but don't consider lying free. Is there an answer to this? Well, there's a legal answer to it, which is lying is free speech, right? You can lie. First of all, ask any of my teenagers, that's free speech. But I think, Bruce, to your point, it can really drain our resilience. Christine, you said something, and I watched every person on the screen nod, which is people are wondering what's a fact. And I really feel like that is a question that 20 years ago would have really surprised us. And everybody listening now goes, oh yeah, that is a problem. We are wondering that. And just that uncertainty really drains resilience. So I'd like to, because Christine, you're the person who mentioned first the exhaustion, and you didn't say disengagement, but maybe you said dug in, people who don't want to hear new things. So I wondered if you could think a little bit about with me, not just how, but also why. And KP and Bhavani, I'm going to push you harder on the why. why to stay engaged. The easiest way, I think, for a lot of people to stay resilient about the election is to be like, I'll look at a headline sometime at the end of November and just see how it turned out. And turning away from something, setting a boundary and saying, hey, that's not important to me. I can't give that the bandwidth. I have people in my home, people at my work, people that I need to give all my energy to, so it can't be that. I'm going to ask Bhavani and KP more to argue against that, right? Because that's been more in their line of work. But Christine, what encouragement might you give, or what strategies might you give to someone you were interviewing who said, yeah, I can't care about that. I can't care about the election at all.
I think if people are exhausted and just overwhelmed by all of it, I think for me, the key is to be intentional about how you're getting your news. So, if it's on all day long, I get it. I mean, every commercial is a political commercial, in addition to politics on the newscasts as well. So you're trying to get your information, and then you have commercials as well. So it's a lot. And then you're getting, updates on your phone. And then every time you check an app and the web, I mean, it's everywhere. So I think for me, it helps to be intentional and say, okay, I'm going to take this time, whether it's, after I eat dinner, or maybe it's in the morning, or maybe it's twice a day, or depending on your, interest level and your time level, but pick how and where you're going to get it. Don't just have the TV on all the time, or the radio on, or your apps constantly boom, 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 this, that, and everything's happening. Say, okay, I really want to learn about what's going on in the news because I'm interested and I need to know. So I'm an informed voter. I mean, I've always loved politics. I actually majored in government undergrad. But I also, realize that not everyone needs to know every single fact. If you miss a little bit, you're going to get caught up. It's okay. So I think just picking also like what works for you, because for me, I remember when I was a kid, my dad is a news junkie. So I grew up with news around all the time. Still, he got me hooked. But I remember that show Crossfire. I don't know if any of you remember that. It was on CNN, and they had a Republican pundit and a liberal pundit, and they would go at it. And I mean, arguing and raised voices. And I remember as a kid, my dad said something, I'm going to turn on Crossfire. I said, is that the arguing show? And it just always bothered me because I feel uncomfortable. I know it makes me anxious when I hear people arguing. And so that's not where I should get my news, because that is not putting me in a state to absorb information and listen and analyze. So I think you have to listen to yourself too on how do you want to get your news in a way that is going to, be informative for you and help you learn what you need to know.
I want to make sure I understand this. You're saying instead of setting the boundary of like, I just can't hear that at all, you're saying use boundaries, but use them to limit, but also take in some information.
Well, and decide how it works for you. What type of news, maybe it's reading it on the website. Maybe it's not listening to a newscast, or maybe it's, maybe that works for you to hear people, go full throttle. But I think you have to kind of know your triggers and what helps you as a person, analyze the news, because that you have to go in with a critical ear, because there's, like we said in the very beginning, Bhavani was saying, there's so many sources, and you have to figure out, okay, who's talking? What's their reason behind what they're saying? So you have to be analytical while you're listening too.
So, Christine, I'm going to respond after you because you picked up a couple of things. I'm going to actually go back to the free speech part. So I am born and raised South Carolina, Southern girl, sweet tea, fried chicken, Southern Baptist, all of that good stuff. And I remember writing my first paper in college. We read the story of Job. And I wrote this paper, and you couldn't tell me. I grew up at a Baptist church, and the first paper is on something out of the Bible. Like, I got this, we're good. And I had to have reliable sources. So I got points deducted because I used the Bible as a reliable source. And I was like taken aback. How could the Bible not be a reliable source? Not this Southern girl, I've been very easy to live a life.
Spicy entrance to your undergraduate education.
I was at a women's college at the time, so we are all rebels. Hear us roar, right? So I'm going back and forth with my college professor about how is this not a reliable source? Why did I get points taken off? Like, you obviously just don't like me. This is personal. And he went back and forth with me. I had to take the grade. And at that point, that's when I started looking at reliable sources differently, right? So that was a reliable for a source to me personally in my life. And when it came to my faith and what I did as a personal person, but in the professional world, it was not seen that way. So then I take it back to 2016 when I really started filtering news outlets and what I took in 2016 was extremely overwhelming for me. I got disengaged with politics for a little bit, and I was just like, I no longer want to work with the party. I want to work with individual people. And I went through this whole meltdown of figuring out where I belonged in politics, because then we thought we were going to see, well, we did see something very pivotal, but we thought we was going to see something pivotal in a different way when it came to election results. So coming now, right? I go back to what you said, Christine, about making sure that you find out what outlets did you find reliable, what outlets did you find that you can have confidence in. And then for me, because I am such a passionate person, I would prefer reading my information. So I don't really watch local news. I do a lot of global news. I learn about people individually by reading. So I'm an article junkie, and my friends get tired of me sending articles and snippets of different blogs to read, because then I can filter what I'm taking in, and then I can perceive the tone, and I don't have to take the tone of someone else's, because it's so much information. It could become overwhelming. It could become toxic, because you take in so much of it. And then the next thing you know, you've been watching CNN and Fox going back and forth for the past 2 hours, and that was your time that you're supposed to be checking emails and replying to text messages, right?
Yes, they're a reason they're called teases. It's to keep you there.
Yeah, and it can really suck you in. And then when you find that you're really uncertain about something that you were maybe more certain about when you got there, that takes a lot of mental energy. KP, you mentioned being disengaged for a while. Why did you bring yourself back, and how did you?
This little voice inside that keeps telling me I have to be the change that I want to see. And Debbie, from working with me, I will sit on the side and I'll pick stuff up, and then I'm like, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to let everybody else do it. And then I'm just not that person. If I see something wrong, I'm going to fix it myself. And it's just, honestly, it's one of those things that I'm not a complainer. It's like, if you see something, do something. If you're not going to add to it, don't take away from it. And that's honestly what it was, is that I was still seeing so much things that needed to be done. And I know that I wouldn't be the person to make the immediate change, but I could be a part of navigating the change that I wanted to see. I could come up with creative ideas, or financially support, or connect ideas and people together, so that we can ultimately see change towards something positive.
So first of all, I love that the little voice in your head is Gandhi. Like, that's a little voice, sure. But also, it sounds like what you're saying is being disengaged wasn't being true to yourself.
Oh, right. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So resilient, right?
Yeah. So how did you draw yourself back in? Did you just go right back to what you'd been doing, or did you take a different approach?
So I think another part of that is how I was reared, right? So college is when I had all these epiphanies. I thought community service was something everybody did on Saturday morning. That's not true. It's something my mom just made me do, and made me think that the whole world was trying to make the world a better place. So I felt like there was an emptiness, because I wasn't doing something that I'd always done, which was community service, which I'd learned how to make a profession, right? With philanthropy work and social impact work. So I went back to the little things, and people, because even though I dropped out, people didn't stop calling me. So there was always a call, or always a need there. Can you help us out, or can you connect with this, or we need this? And that's really, I left it. It did not leave me. So it wasn't a hard transition to get back engaged and involved. And obviously, as you know, Debbie, to the highest point of making sure that things are right and that people are presented with good information.
Yeah, all you had to do was answer the texts that you never stopped getting. Okay. So, Bhavni, you fought, and I'll just say it from the perspective of a constituent in the Democratic district that you ran in, you fought an incredibly passionate, integrity-filled race in our primary and connected so deeply with each of the groups, and I think almost all of the people that you were trying to represent, really anybody you could meet. And really, to use a sports metaphor, left it all on the field, really. I mean, all the way through past the finish line. And so I wonder, did that experience and not pulling it off, right? Not getting as many votes as you needed to win, did that cause you to disengage? Because a lot of people think, well, I can be resilient as long as it's working, right? As long as I'm winning. So how was that for you in terms of thinking about, because here we are months later, and you're willing to talk about politics and you're involved in the upcoming election?
Yeah, so that, well, first of all, thank you for saying that. I still get really emotional when I think about sort of like that 9 months, because
I do. And I wasn't involved in your campaign except as somebody who cared.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was emotionally draining for lots of reasons. But I will say this, knowing the outcome, I would fight that fight again, knowing that I wasn't going to win. Because to me, I think when you enter into something like that, you really do have to put every ounce of energy that you have into it. And at the time, I was like running like 150 miles an hour and really wasn't like aware of how much I was like pouring myself into this, because you're thinking about the community, you're thinking about the people that you're fighting to represent, and it's constant every minute, right? You go to sleep at 1, you're waking up at 6, your phone goes off, you're taking in people's emotions, you're putting them at ease. Simultaneously, you're handling your own emotions, and then you're doing all like the logistical things that you have to do and putting on, a presentation essentially. And so by the time the election was over, I was really, really, and I still am incredibly proud of the race that we ran. But I almost like, I didn't realize it, but I also went through like the cycle of grief. I was like, okay, like, we ran a really strong race. This was amazing. Like we built a movement in the 9 months time. And then it kind of hit me. I was like, I was moving at 100 miles an hour. Now it's like 5 miles an hour. It's a lot different. Where do you take all this energy and this desire to change the world? Where do you put it? And I think that was something that I really struggled with, and building yourself up from ground zero all the way to finding a way to engage and getting excited about things again. It's a really, really hard thing to do. But I think ultimately what helped me was reconnecting with why I started on day one. Why was it that I announced my run? Why was it that I was so passionate about this? And I think reminding myself of those moments is what really helped me get back into sort of the game and continue, serving and being a part of the community. But it's not easy. So I think that the key takeaway here is having a lot of self-awareness is really important. Knowing why you do the things that you do and really connecting with that is really critical. And ultimately giving yourself grace, and then, taking the time that you need. And then, I think you're eventually able to find your path.
What would you say to someone who said to you, I just don't care about politics. It just doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I think that's a feeling that a lot of people have right now. They feel like they're not being represented by either side. And this goes back to what KP was saying. I mean, I think that I wish that we had more leaders in our region, but also nationally, who felt the burden of and who felt the responsibility of igniting a passion in people to want to pay attention to politics and legislative issues. And quite frankly, I think that that's a challenge that we face as a nation. I think that these extremes that we see on both sides really has eroded the essence of democracy. And, I was just reading what Bruce said, which is that, filtering can negate opposing views, but opposing views are also important to understand. And I think that that's so true, but it's just a matter of how do we find voices that are willing to actually engage in the nuance in both sides? That is the difficult work that needs to be done in order for us to ignite a passion in the people to actually care about voting and doing the work of figuring out who's running and what do they believe in. And until we do that, I think that we're going to face a lot of challenges. I I think that right now in this moment, however, we are seeing excitement from, lots of different age groups with, the current Democratic nominee. And I think that there is a shift there. It remains to be seen, how we're able to continue that passion, ignite that sort of keeping that change and that momentum heading into next year if the Democrats do win in November. But ultimately, I think it's going to require a lot of healing. And we really do need to work on this issue, I think, of misinformation and sort of because, social media, the way in which information spreads so quickly and how, sometimes you have public figures who think that they can say things and that becomes the truth. That's an incredibly dangerous thing. And I think that's what fuels extremism. And there's almost like a political strategy in doing that, because when you create or when you identify an other, that's what fuels your base. And that's a very dangerous way to look at public service. So that's not service. That's just that's a power game.
I agree.
So I think that's the big thing. I totally agree with the comment that understanding opposite, opposed views is extremely important. And again, as I shared, I try to stick with those sources and outlets that I find are reliable to be my truth of where I gain more information, to have a more value to what I understand and add more validity to where I stand when it comes to things and to learn new things. But the challenge for me has been, I think, not just in the past year, but maybe for the past 8 or so years, has been a lack of knowledge, right? So not people just just like making up stuff and calling it try. Like, I don't even know another way of saying it. It's just like, this is what I think and this is truth. And it's like, well, where did you find that from? Where did you get that from? And that's been extremely challenging for me, in addition to people not understanding how government works. So when you ask the question of people just not being engaged, or I just want to have anything to do with politics, I take it from a ground level perspective, as in, well, you don't have to care about politics, but do you care if we have streetlights? So let me tell you who's actually in charge of telling you how many streetlights you have, how many sidewalks you have. Okay, let me tell you who's over that. Let me tell you where the money in that budget comes from. So I take it from a ground level, grassroots perspective, and then try to bring it up to the larger view of, okay, well, this is why your taxes looks this way. And yes, it may be like this under one administration, but things roll over as a 4-year effect. Just like if you have a credit card, you don't pay over, there's interest rates, So I think for me, the challenge has been for those people that aren't engaged and don't want to have to do with anything with politics. I think they forget that, they forget what we learned in 9th grade in just the basic U.S. history of how things really do affect you on a day-to-day perspective, and how, the proof is in the pudding when it comes to the numbers, and you're included in those numbers, which is a whole big thing on the lack of us educating people on the census and redistricting, on how we even get to the elections. The elections are the final point, but there are 2 different steps till we get here for you to be included and for your voice to matter.
Civics class matters.
It does. It does. Well, and I love what you said too. If I could just jump off that with the differing sources and opinions, I completely agree. And it is important to see, kind of like what I was saying about when you're looking for those sources, look and see if those people have a motivation for saying certain things. And in terms of free speech and accurate speech too, it can get confusing because, for example, on our airways with national network, we are required to air whatever political ads will want to buy ad space, whether it's accurate or not. We cannot just say we won't run that because it's not true. So that can get confusing too. You have to be careful, which is an ad, which is the newscast. Now, if we say something untrue in the newscast, that's a whole different story. We can be sued for that. So you have to really be aware of exactly what it is you're watching. Is it an ad? Is it news? Where's it coming from? And like you said, it's gotten more confusing because it used to be, of course, back when my parents grew up, everybody watched the 3 networks, and then the local papers and maybe some national papers. But now so many people are getting their news through their phones and through their social media and may not even know the source of where that news is coming from. In fact, I even asked my kids, Debbie, I think you probably taught me this. I remember one day my son came down, we were having breakfast. He said, "Oh, Mom, this is happening in this Pennsylvania." And I said, "Where'd you get that information?" I said, "Show me." And he showed me, and it was the actual congressman with his own video. And I was like, now that is a good source. That's a first person source. So good job. But, a lot of times it's, 4 sources removed, or who knows where, someone with an agenda.
So, Christine, tell me like I am a 5th grader, and I know your kids are a little older now, like mine are, but what is a fact?
Well, maybe that's now that you ask it that way. I mean, a fact is something that's true, but I think in politics that can sometimes get maybe a little. I don't want to say a fact is not a fact, because a fact is a fact, but there are certain things that maybe don't have a fact. You can have an opinion on a fact, and sometimes people try and present that opinion or a certain angle or a spin on the fact that might look different. So I think you have to really get down to the source of where is that fact coming from.
That's what it is, right? This is what and journalists spend a lot of time on. Is it verifiable? Can you find out about it from more than one place?
Right.
And I do feel like the burden is more now on the consumer to act like we think journalists spend most of their time being like, well, can I trace that down? Can I find it from more than one place? There's I've never been to journalism school, but I know there's this idea that, if your mom tells you she loves you, you still got to verify it. And so that piece of, I got a bunch of people in my house that can state an opinion like it is fact carved in stone. He got a bigger piece of cake than I did. Be like, and if I ask them to prove it, they will get the tape measure. And so we spend a lot of our time in our lives through our development trying to figure out where the line is between fact, opinion, belief, value, feeling, observation. And it's not a crime or confusing that's hard, especially when we care so much. Roz said something really interesting in the chat. She said, hearing an opposing view based on lies is mind-bending for me. And so as we get more mistrustful of what we hear, the easiest thing is to say, fine, I won't listen to anything besides that. You all brought up something really important. Each of you in different ways said that one way to stay resilient while you're staying engaged is to make sure you're aligned. You didn't each use that particular word, but, Christine, you talked about being aligned with sources that speak to you in a way you can hear, right? Choosing, like KP, you said you read. And it's funny, you said you're a passionate person, so you read. And I think it's maybe, although you didn't say this, I'm inferring that you're saying, I don't want to deal with their emotions of whoever's giving it to me. I want to see it in print, even if that's on a screen, right? I want to see words on a page to take as much of the emotion out of it as I can, so that I can take in things and make my own decision about them. That's the best way for you to be aligned with how you take it in. And Christine, your suggestion about finding it in a way that you can learn, that puts you in the right frame of mind. So you said you don't learn well when people are screaming at each other. Doesn't even matter if they're, who's correct or who you agree with. There's just too much emotion for you to take it in. And that, and Bhavani, you talked about something I thought was really important about alignment too, was you said, I think I went through the whole grief cycle. You allowed that. You allowed yourself to have some emotions, probably not while you were going 150 miles an hour, but as a part of re-engaging. You said, okay, these emotions are real. You all expressed empathy for other people, to say you understand why people are, Bhavani, you talked about feeling some sadness and recognizing that you saw other people who felt that way too. Frustration, exhaustion, fear, excitement, hope. Nobody used that word, but there was a little bit of that idea that maybe some people have hope. And that alignment is really useful. But I have a question that I'm really thinking about now is, we find reliable, and we all talked about reliable sources, right? We find reliable the things that are most aligned with our worldview. So KP, you said you found the Bible to be a reliable source. It's aligned with your worldview. right? And that makes sense to me. I don't want myself or my kids or anybody to accept that something's reliable that really sounds totally off the mark. But then I also need to open to the possibility that opposing views might have something valid to them. So I think we maybe get stuck trying to find the alignment we need to stay engaged and resilient, and feel like anything that isn't aligned with us might still have facts, might still be reliable.
That's so interesting to me. And I laughed when you asked Christine, so what's a fact? And you talked about her being a journalist. So my sister is a trained journalist, doctorate's degree, all that good stuff. And I have another good friend that's a journalist, like she's on Good Morning Baltimore every morning. And I laugh when certain articles come out and the people that are delivering the message, because they're like, they're not a journalist. They didn't do the work. They don't have the facts. So I think we are in a dangerous space because there's so many people with podcasts who are specialists and influencers and listen to me because I was there once and I had a really good view and I took a good picture and it went viral. So now I'm a journalist and I'm the guru, right? And that's very dangerous. And that's why we've gotten to the place of information overload, because I think journalists are the real journalists are trying to do the work of being louder than the little voices that have found information and called themselves a self-made guru. And Christine, you'll pick up that I'm pretty black and white and I'm straight to the point when I'm a straight shooter. So we have so many of the people giving their opinion and calling themselves gurus and that kind of thing that it's become extremely dangerous and hard for the work that real journalists have to do. So it goes back to what I said when we first started this conversation. You have to figure out what you find as a reliable source, and they can have an opposite view. When I first met Debbie, we had a very engaging conversation. She taught me so much. I did not know. We did not agree on things. And it was just like, okay, well, thanks for letting me know I have a different perspective on it. And I'm going to take that home and sit with that, right? But I found her a reliable source, somebody that I could find comfort in, felt like it was a safe space, and that she was telling honest truth based on her experience and her information. And I felt like she received that from me as well. So I think we still have to go for whatever that little voice is within, of knowing, well, this feels right. Hopefully, we know what that right voice feels like when it comes to the opposite view. And again, for me, reading that, rather it's an article of somebody from an opposing view, well, let me hear their perspective and see where they're coming from and try to understand where they came with that thought so I can have a better understanding and then have empathy for them with their situation. And it's okay that we're not going to agree, but we can find that middle ground.
It's funny because my parents were just visiting and sometimes we all have differing views on politics. And I just said, hey, let's just let go of politics for this trip. We're so close to the election. I think it might make for a just more relaxing trip, which it has been and was wonderful. But it's funny because, and I think that was a good choice for us for this trip. But at one point, my daughter, who's 19, had a conversation with my dad, who's 79. So what is that? Big age difference.
Yeah.
And different political sides of the spectrum. And they did start talking about politics, but it was such a respectful conversation. And I was actually really thrilled that, like, okay, sometimes, even though you think it's going to go bad, hopefully if the two people respect each other, you can, like you said, KP, learn from the other's experiences.
Respect.
Ooh. So I want to point out two more strategies that you all have highlighted just to make sure people really hear them. And one is that why. So connecting with your own why, like you did, Bhavni, about why you first ran, and you use that same why. It's still who you are. It's why KP re-engaged after 2016. It's why Christine keeps doing this work of what's important to me is still important to me. Who I mean to be is still important to me. And when we're checking sources, asking what's their why, what's their goal, and seeing if you respect that goal and can find the respect that they could tell you. Like when KP and I had a hard conversation, meaning possibly a provocative conversation, I was willing to say, this is a fact I know, and this is an opinion I have, and to separate them, so that it would be easier for her to take in, to decide how it was going to land for her, how it integrated with her worldview. The other thing, KP, that you pointed out that I think is so important to stay engaged is to remember that if you can connect what you care about to who has power over that, you get some power, you get some choice and some agency, and that builds our resilience. Someone in the chat said, disengagement can be self-preservation. And Christine gave a great example of that. She wanted to make sure that her family's time together fit the goal of building connection and good memories, and so chose to somewhat disengage from politics for a period of time. But disengaging forever strips us of choice and control. So before we go, I want to do a quick round robin and ask each of you, and Bhavni, I'm going to start with you. What's your favorite thing to do to reset or feel better when election stress starts to get to you?
Yeah, I think I might be a little bit weird in this one, but I think when I feel stressed or it gets too much, there's two things. It's I like knocking on doors because I kind of like to get a sense of like what people are thinking. And I like the idea of like fresh air and kind of like being on my feet and staying active. But and then the second thing is actually communicating more and reaching out to people within my network and sort of building that connection, kind of getting a sense of, you know, what people are thinking and and basically gathering different perspectives to help guide sort of my thinking and frame my thinking. Those are my two things.
I'm grateful for you. Wow. Okay. Christine, how about you?
I just like to take a walk with the dog. I mean, the dog makes me happy. She's the cutest little like living stuffed animal. Being out in nature always clears my mind. I think sometimes, you know, I'm listening to a lot of news because that is part of my job. So I have to listen to a lot. And sometimes I just need the no noise and the birds to kind of soak it all in. And then of course, you know, when you're walking and you're exercising, that always just makes your body feel better. So between the three, it's my go-to.
So exercise outdoors with a non-voter. Got it. Okay.
Perfect.
KP, how about you?
So Bhavni, you know, hands down to you. Two things I strongly dislike is door knocking and phone banking. I am like, how much can I donate to make sure that we have the people and the snacks to get that done? So more power to you. But for me, whenever I need to reset, I call two of my, I call them my political parents. And that's Seth and Carrie Whipper. It was the first when Representative Whipper ran. I was 6 years old, and that's the first campaign job I ever had. That's my introduction into politics. Door knocking at the age of 6. His campaign was light blue and royal blue and baby blue, and I remember the T-shirts. And that was the first Saturday morning community service introduction to politics that I had at the age of 6, and I still have that memory. So whenever I'm overwhelmed, I give them a call as a couple. They're in their 70s, and then they fuss at me about, well, if you're going to stop, then who's going to continue to work? We're too old to get out there. So just listening to them and their stories and the things that they've seen during their tenure of being engaged as community leaders and in politics just always gives me the energy and the reset that I need.
Okay. So all of that is excellent, excellent advice. And I really very much appreciate everyone's time. We cannot escape the fact that the consequences of voting matter. And because we want to keep living in the world, we got to take our opportunities for choice and engagement and pair them with the other strategies that we heard today so that we can have the strength to keep going. I'm grateful for the three of you who make a real positive impact on the world every day, and to everybody who's with us today. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you next month when we're going to talk about what are resilient communities and how can we get more of that.